One of the things that I love about being a reporter and working at Voice of San Diego is that I work for you guys. I want to answer your questions. I want to dig into the issues that you're concerned about. And so we love getting tips and suggestions from our readers about what issues and stories they want us to tell. And what I love about working at Voice of San Diego too is that I get the opportunity to follow up on those tips and suggestions that come from our readers. We serve our readers and members. That's what matters at the end of the day, that we get the information that you want and tell the important stories that you need to hear that you wouldn't otherwise get.
Support Voice of San Diego right now during our spring fundraising campaign to help ensure important stories keep getting made, and reporters like Lisa Halverstadt can keep digging. Give now at vosd.org/give.
I did it.
No, you did, but everyone else was.
I didn't. I wasn't paying attention when you were saying.
That was obvious.
So I'll go 3, 2,
different.
1, go, and on go you're gonna clap or make a loud noise to your microphone so I can line us all up. All right, 3, 2, 1, go.
Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast in partnership with News Radio 600 Kogo. I am Scott Lewis, CEO and editor-in-chief at Voice of San Diego. I'm joined, as always, by assistant editor Andrew Keats. Hello, my man.
What's up, buddy?
Managing editor Sarah Libby.
Hey, all you cool cats and kittens.
How's the closet, Sarah?
It's great. Everything's great.
So you're ensconced in a closet. I have people working on our bathroom because that's the thing you're supposed to do during a global pandemic. And Andy is you're chilling
Wearing
these days?
2 sets of headphones.
Yes. All right. Well, this is our third show from coronavirus land. All of us are in our homes, of course, but the news has not stopped. Far from it. It is crazy how every day is still fascinating and different and something to grapple with. So we're going to talk about a few things today. One is about local leaders doing some leadering. We might actually manage to somewhat say positive things about local leadership. So hold on to your seats. I don't want to raise expectations too much. We might not be able to pull it off, but we're going to give it a try. We'll also go over a bit of the inconsistent approach some of those local leaders have taken on local beaches in particular and parks. So a lot going on there. And finally, we're going to talk about the mass mobilization to secure hotel rooms, how much that costs, and also how it's working for emergency shelters for local people who are affected by the coronavirus, but also people who don't have homes. And related, the San Diego Convention Center has gone from being a driver of economic development that was going to be relied on to help support homeless services in San Diego to being an actual homeless shelter. So, wow, what a month. One of the issues I've been following very closely is this issue of the USS Theodore Roosevelt. It is an aircraft carrier based at North Island. It deployed in January on its way to Indonesia. They thought they were going to be involved in a conflict, perhaps with Iran, when they left. Obviously, though, things have changed, and the conflict ended up in their own, in their own facility. The aircraft carriers have, 5,000 people. They're like small towns. Everybody's cramped together. And there was this incredible story broken this week by the San Francisco Chronicle that the captain of the ship, Captain Brett Crozier, sent a letter to higher-ups at the Pentagon saying there's an emergency. There's been an outbreak of the COVID-19 infection on the ship. And, of course, there's nowhere for sailors to go. There's nowhere to quarantine them. Only a few officers have the kind of staterooms that people can isolate in. and the rest are going to spread the disease wildly. He cited cruise ships and their experience, and it was truly an incredible letter, but also most incredible that it got into the hands of the San Francisco Chronicle. And, he said there was a moment in there where he says, look, we can imagine having to lose sailors if we're at war, but we're not at war, and we should get them off of here. They're our most valuable asset. We should leave, 10% of the aircraft carrier here to take care of the nuclear power plant. That's what my wife used to do, and then we can make sure everybody's isolated and take care of everybody, and then get back going. The letter was again stunning, and just today, Thursday, as we record this, we got the news that he is going to be relieved of his command. He's being punished for this letter. What an incredible act of leadership in this moment. They're most mad. They say that the letter got into the media, but it's just it's shameful if he suffers more consequence than that, because it seems like he's done something extraordinary to perhaps save lives and and actually help national security. It seems like having sailors healthy matters. I was really affected by the story, obviously.
I mean, it seems to me that he probably did this all knowing full well what consequences were likely, and he weighed those consequences and decided to do what he did anyway, which is, makes it a sort of a classic example of civil disobedience to some extent. And I know the military punishes breaches of chain of command harshly, but I sort of agree with Jackie Spire, Rep. Jackie Spire from the House Armed Services Committee, who said, instead of being punished, he should be commended for this.
Yeah. Just another incredible display, though, of just how this virus is affecting people. That's if this does get into all of these different ships, there's no more cramped place where people are sharing air, touching the same rails, right there next to each other. And that could just have devastating consequences on the whole fleet. So for San Diego, a Navy town, that's something to watch for. It's just, you see people in these moments, when everything gets boiled down to these big decisions in this crisis, you see people stand up, and it's been kind of cool to watch some folks across the country do that. And speaking of which, locally, we've been keeping our eye on some of these leaders. It's hard for us to really, give a lot of praise out if that's what it is, but it's hard to also ignore that a couple of people have really stood out, and it kind of makes you feel good about living here, right? Isn't that how you put it, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of came to me as I was watching or absorbing this news out of Georgia with Governor Kemp saying that he had just learned that it was possible for the virus to be transmitted from somebody who was not experiencing symptoms, and I guess I just, for a moment, thought about how the leaders in charge of this county and this state have thus far. I'm sure we will have plenty of time to learn about what might not have gone well, or whether there's been any unintended consequences from the actions they've taken. But I see no examples of people recklessly disregarding the health and welfare of citizens the way we've seen in Florida and Georgia.
Yeah, I think if you think back to issues big and small, whether it was vacation rentals or the Hep A crisis, I think several times throughout those we found ourselves thinking where is the mayor on this? And that's not something we've been asking. He's definitely been out in front throughout this and stepped in to make some probably pretty unpopular decisions, like shutting down parks and beaches before a lot of other places did. And I think that was a good move.
Yeah, not only were they unpopular, they were early. Right. They were early, and so much of the defense I've heard of certain officials has been how difficult it is to make these sorts of major mandates or restrictions before the community understands the threat that they're under. And another way of saying that is it's very difficult to do something early. But basically across the board, whether it's closing businesses, moving towards the school systems closing, parks, beaches, that sort of thing. Basically on every front, I do feel like San Diego as a whole has reacted before something became a very serious problem.
Yeah, if you think, what I always try to break down leaders in these moments is there's kind of two. There's there's the leader who helps you understand what's happening, tells the story really well, tries to make you understand where you're going, why you're going there, and what's going to happen. And then there's kind of the general that just makes big decisions, tries to logistically handle things. And I think that that's broken down really interestingly with Kevin Faulkner. Like we mentioned, he's making a lot of decisions in that way. Maybe not telling the story about why things are the way they are or where we're headed as much. That role, it seems like, has been led by Nathan Fletcher in the county and some other county leaders. Eric McDonald, the leader of the epidemiology effort in the county, and a few others who have just really explained where we're going really well and why we're headed there. And I think it brought a level of assurance and calmness to this whole situation that maybe other areas aren't benefiting from. You know, you look at like Bill de Blasio in New York City. It sounds like it's been kind of a mess for quite some time before he finally settled into like, maybe we should deal with this intensely. And we didn't, like you said, we didn't deal with that here. And, you know, like you said, there's a lot of questions. We just, we're going to talk later about the $200,000 a day that the county is spending on securing those hotel rooms, only 200 of which have actually, been occupied by people yet. So there's kind of things like we're going to have to hold accountable and stuff like that. But it is nice to see, some of these things, be just proactively developed, and we can hash out how it worked out over time.
Yeah, even I look at some of the economic relief efforts that are underway locally are areas where I don't think that the level of relief provided has been quite so large that it makes me think we're really going to be able to effectively cushion the blow for people or businesses. So that's one area where I'm not exactly confident that San Diego specifically has figured something out that's going to prevent things from getting much worse. But I also don't necessarily blame anyone for that. It seems to be largely a byproduct of the level of capital available here, as far as I can tell. I mean, the relief funds from the San Diego Foundation that the city's made available for small businesses, they just seem small to the scale of the problem. But it's not as though I could see some sort of obvious way they could have avoided that reality. And then the other ways where they've attempted to buttress those efforts, I wrote this week about this measure that the mayor's introduced to allow businesses to avoid paying their business licensing fees for a few months, to defer those payments. And that's a very small program one way or the other. But one group of people who's raised an alarm about it is people who run individual business improvement districts who get some of those fees. And they were concerned that deferring those fees at this time period might make some of them go under. They might have to close their doors. And even there, I think that's an example of what you were talking, Scott, about lending some clarity into why the decisions being made are being made. And the economic development director said pretty clearly, look, we don't have great choices in front of us. And so weighing our priorities, we decided to put helping businesses in front of helping organizations that help businesses. And so in the long term, that might not turn out to be the right decision. We'll see how it goes. Maybe, or it'll turn out to be immaterial either way because it's so small. But at least there's some clarity of thought, and you can understand why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah. Well, and along with that, one of the biggest decisions they made, and especially Kevin Faulkner made, was to close the city's local beaches and parks, and not even just the beaches, but also, what that impacts, which in particular was surfing, and obviously San Diego's a surfing city. And so that was a big decision looking back. There was a lot of people that, took advantage of the outdoors. Obviously, what's San Diego without the beaches, without the parks, without the trails, that sort of thing. And so, a lot of people were getting out, but, it was really hard to avoid them once you did get out. And it hit me particularly hard when they announced the closure. I had just gone surfing that weekend and had looked forward to that being my only way to get exercise. And now people who run through parks, everything have lost that. And so that was a huge decision to have to make. And now, most of the local cities in the county kind of followed suit in a way, but a few didn't. Oceanside decided to keep its beaches open. Carlsbad finally closed them earlier this week. And then Coronado said, well, we're gonna hybrid this, right? We're gonna have the beaches closed on the weekends. Which, does anybody have a weekend anymore? Like, is there like a distinction?
What is a weekend?
Is there a distinction that people are, storing up their energy for the weekend these days?
Is there a distinction between Sunday and April?
Yeah. Yeah. So, but the other one that caught my eye, this was kind of amusing, was that they wanted to make sure, though, that Dog Beach in Coronado, there's basically a Dog Beach in Coronado, Dog Beach in Ocean Beach, and Dog Beach in Del Mar. There's no more, right? Is there others I'm missing? And
Fiesta Island, kind of.
Oh, yeah, Fiesta Island, yeah. The Dog Beach in Coronado was the only one that remained open. And Coronado decided, no, that one has to be closed. I talked to Whitney Bezian, who's a city councilman there, and he said the logic was the dogs just don't understand this social distancing. And so they'll end up, compelling their owners to have to break that 6-foot gap all the time. Fucking dogs don't know how to stay apart, make everybody make out together or something. But it's just another fascinating moment. You know that this is one of those half measures that's just going to be memory in a couple of weeks, right? Like, there's no way that this sort of keeping it open on the weekdays is matter. What they're trying to do is make sure that all the people who are in Coronado can still walk, right, in the morning, like
exactly.
And they're just not going to be able to protect it, I don't think.
It strikes me as exactly the type of half measure that you do because the full measure is unpopular and difficult, and
Right.
you want to
Yeah,
avoid
exactly.
trying to make it. Yeah.
I think they're struggling with that in places like Encinitas as well, where, I just talked to Assemblywoman Tasha Borner-Horvath's office about some of her colleagues in the assembly have pleaded with the governor to just straight up close all the beaches instead of this same sort of half measure where they've closed the parking lots. And she was hesitant to say that she would join on with that and sort of said she thinks it's working fine as it is and that people need to just be able to go outside as long as they're social distancing. And so she definitely was not willing to take that stand that the state beaches should be closed.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I wonder, would it be like a shocking bit of information to people to know that there are whole places, whole locations that don't have beaches? Like in an entire city, there's just not a beach. Could you imagine?
Yeah, I mean, I
do you
understand.
think any of the like truly broken people over the beach closure realize that like there is a place called Dallas, Texas?
No, I mean, I think that's part of the thing is like their identities are being taken, and I think what's hard about this is like all of our identities have been completely erased by this thing. Like,
that's exactly the thing. It's like, but that would be inconvenient to the way I like to spend my time
Right.
during quarantine.
Well, I still can't get over this. One of the biggest changes, just remember just March 3rd, we were talking about a tax increase that they had on the ballot to increase the taxes on hotel rooms, and that was going to spin off so much money they could expand the convention center, and they were going to use it for homeless services. And now, just a month later, not only did that not happen, but hotel taxes have been completely zeroed out. And they're going to actually just turn the convention center, they did, into a homeless shelter. The first people to move into it are residents, people who were inside of those bridge shelters. Remember, they were called bridge shelters not because they were an actual bridge, but because they were a bridge to something. And it turns out that something was the convention center. And just an extraordinary moment when you try to add up just how much has changed. There's very few symbolic things that are so striking like that, and it's just amazing to see the switch. And now they're moving people in there, the idea being that they can't keep them separate in these tents, and they got to get people out off the street, off these encampments, so that they can be farther apart from each other and not transmit the disease. But it does feel like we've suddenly also just kind of, as a city, decided that all these homeless residents are a charge of the city. Like they're something we should take care of in the long term, and that's going to be hard to ever roll back.
It would be hard to roll back in general, like the logic of the decision, but also just logistically. And what do you do when the coronavirus is declared under control? Do you just open the doors of the convention center and allow people to go wherever they want, or do you feel some sort of obligation to connect them to some permanent home?
Yeah, back to the street. Sorry, we're done now. Like, it's just hard to picture that ever happening. And so Lisa Halberstadt on our staff has been following another effort underway. So talk about big move. Like, that's just huge for Kevin Faulkner to
I would add also, just like in terms of how much things have changed in the month, you had the tourism industry mobilized around getting that tax measure passed at the start of the month, coming up just short, and then a few short weeks later seeing their occupancy fall to near zero, and many motels and hotels become themselves part of this rapid housing effort.
Yeah, Lisa Halberstadt's tracked that one area that they are renting hotel rooms is by the county. 2,000 rooms, more than 2,000 rooms have been set aside by the county, costing the county $200,000 a day, about $6 million a month. And, counting, the state has pledged to put about $50 million to that effort. Only about 200 or so of these rooms are occupied right now, as they've set it aside for two groups of people. One is people who get the virus, who don't have any place to go to isolate themselves. And the second group are homeless or housing insecure folks who are at risk of getting the virus or who may somehow transmit it. And so it's another extraordinary decision. Getting the convention center turned into a homeless shelter, getting the Golden Hall turned into a homeless shelter, getting these hotel rooms set up and ready. All of these things are big moves when we're talking about all these leadership decisions.
Yeah, you were talking about, we praise city leaders for these big moves, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not without room for improvement. And it seems like there's been a lot of confusion, both as to who's able to access these rooms. I thought it was really helpful that Lisa was able to provide clarity on these two different kinds of groups, because I think there's a widespread assumption that they're just for homeless people, and that's not really the case. And then also the fact that only a few of them are filled, and I think that we're starting to find out that that's actually true statewide, as more counties have made similar moves to amass, huge blocks of motel rooms, and only a fraction of them are being filled.
Yeah, I mean, there just seems to be so much more follow-up needed in this whole area. And that's not to criticize officials at this point. It's a Herculean effort to find all of these rooms, to get them in position to be used in this new and different way, and to transfer cash from the public sector to the private sector for these sorts of rooms, and then actually get people in them and make sure that that goes effectively and is done safely, and that those people are then taken somewhere else afterwards. But in each of those steps, there's room for something potentially to go wrong, or for something unforeseen to interrupt it. And we're clearly at the very beginning of that process right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially because you're talking about, a very vulnerable group of people. And so if a group like the three of us doesn't really know what the protocols are or the hoops you have to jump through to access something, imagine trying to disseminate that type of information to a much different population.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, the unforeseen consequences that I'm looking eager to look into are, I mean, what were these motel and hotel rooms doing prior to this, and what happened in the interruption from them being that to now here? Because most of these rooms are not going to be your Hilton Bayfronts that typically cater to business travelers or vacationers. I think, especially because they're so dispersed throughout the county, you're going to have a lot more that are used for as sort of pseudo housing.
Mhm.
And so if their occupancy rate even, was at like 10%, were any of those 10% people who lived there and did the transition from them to them becoming essentially county-run shelters, did it displace any of those people who were finding something resembling permanent housing in them? I don't think we know any of that stuff, and I just think, without faulting anyone necessarily, I think it's just an odd arrangement of the public sector and the private sector that is ripe for something that we did not foresee to take place.
I guess the final point I would want to make is that there are some silver linings to this. And I don't mean silver linings in the sense of like, I got to watch The Wire again, or, I got all these kinds of, it's nice to spend time with your family in a different way, that kind of thing. I'm talking about there's actual things happening that feel like it might change how we approach a lot of public affairs problems. Like, look, let's talk about the housing crisis, for example. It does seem like we've gone from renting a place in San Diego being just a brutal experience, incredibly competitive and high priced, to tenants suddenly seizing some incredible power. Every local government and the state have passed moratorium on evictions. So basically, I've argued it should be probably called something like eviction delay. They're still going to make them pay back rent, but it still does transfer some leverage to the tenants. You have vacation rentals that have to have completely evaporated as an option for people, and so maybe they're going to start flooding the market. And so you might have a situation where the market for housing has completely shifted here. The second related is homelessness. It seems like, the HEPA did something to mobilize the community around homelessness. This has just been that on steroids. It could be a transformative experience for homelessness. And then another thing like universal broadband. We're realizing that the internet is not a luxury, that high, fast, good, excellent internet is just required for life, and especially if we start running the education system through that. And so maybe we will finally get a handle on who doesn't have it, who does, and what are we going to do to fix that. And so, those are three things that they're not good things necessarily, but they're, there's this, the community is really going to have to grapple with them in a new, different, and probably understanding way.
I would add working from home to that for several businesses that, we've heard from a lot of places that say they didn't have the technological capabilities to pull that off. But I think there's this whole other portion of businesses that were simply just reluctant to let people out of their sites. And I think hopefully, especially in the private sector, but maybe for government agencies as well, they'll be able to reconsider some of those decisions.
Yeah, even just in one very specific example that's, nonetheless small and not relevant to a lot of people, but is real, is development services at the city, who reviews and approves plans for new developments and gives people building permits, is quickly transitioning towards accepting any sort of permits online, as opposed to, if you've ever walked around downtown, you might have seen people carrying a bunch of rolls of very oversized pieces of paper, like a caricature of an architect or something.
Right.
And that had always been the way. You had to submit all of your plans in paper, in person, and then there was a review process that way. They're quickly shifting towards doing that all on the internet. And my understanding is that they intend that to be a full-time shift. So this probably accelerated something that was already on their minds, but that it lights a fire under them, and there's no going back once you move to that, I think.
Yeah. There's a lot to follow. Obviously, we're trying to understand things from all these different perspectives in so many different ways. We've been following this crisis basically in three major areas. One is the issue of healthcare and protecting people who are on the front lines of healthcare, but also understanding the virus itself and how far and wide it'll spread. The second area is government, how government's responding, not just to the virus, but how it's responding to the impact of the virus on its thing. It's going to make all these agencies are going to make huge decisions about service levels, employee layoffs, all kinds of different things. And we're going to watch and make sure their priorities are in check. And then third, the economy, that area we've been focusing intensely on to help people understand. And it's a big part of our reporters' focus. So, all those reporters are working. They're doing their part. They need resources. We're continuing to pay everybody and go. We're determined to get through this strong. And that brings me to our point that this is our 15th year serving San Diego. If you want us to thrive and survive through all of this and maybe even build a better connection with everybody in the community, please consider donating to our spring campaign. You can do that at our website. Go to vosd.org/give. That's vosd.org/give. We have several hundred people this week already who have jumped in, which was wonderful to see because we didn't know exactly how this would happen. We were determined to be relevant, and people noticed it. Thanks for listening to the Voice of San Diego podcast, the most popular public affairs podcast recorded in Ocean Beach and other places around the city. Normally, it's recorded in the Voice of San Diego podcast studio downtown, which is sponsored by the Bob Nelson Charitable Fund. Thank you, Bob Nelson Charitable Fund. If you want to keep up with everything we're doing at Voice, the best way to do that is with the Morning Report. Subscribe to that at vosd.org/newsletters. I'm Scott Lewis, CEO and Editor-in-Chief. Andrew Keats is Assistant Editor, and Sarah Libby's Managing Editor. This show was produced by Nate John, Megan Wood, and Adriana Heldes. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next week.